Okay, so please advise when it is 1800 hours.
No, man. No, man.
On Zoom.
Oh,
Okay, so it is 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Daylight Time, rather, on the 15th of August of the year 2023. This will commence the Buckley Special City Council study session. On the agenda, we have two items: the updated forecast and the budget balance, which Admin Finance received yesterday. And is Councilmember Rose on? Okay, great. And then the second item that was requested at last council meeting by Councilmember Asano would be the City Hall remodel conversation. So without further ado, let's get into the budget.
All right. Shiva will tee up our PowerPoint. Okay, thank you, Shiva. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight's study session on the budget is to look at updated forecast numbers and provide you some updated information on the toolbox options we looked at. Oh my God, I forgot, sorry. Move that over. Thank you. Updated forecast numbers since we last looked at it in April, and look at the toolbox options that we looked at in April also with some updated information, and to provide a recommended 3-year strategy using those options and show you some forecast results of that. What we've handed out in hard copy is copies of the slides, as well as larger pictures and copies of the toolbox and the forecast that will be in the slides, but then you'll have larger copies to be able to look at. On. You have a better angle.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. All right, never mind. We always hope the clicker works, but you know. So tonight we'll be looking at that updated forecast, the toolbox, the 3-year strategy and alternatives, service level reductions. So looking at the other side of the toolbox from the revenues to the expenses, and time for council comments and feedback. So first, we wanted to provide you an update on the scenario 1 forecast. So when we looked at it in April, we had provided a baseline forecast that was current level of service with expenditures and for just forecasting revenue. And then we had provided in a scenario 1 forecast, which those 5 scenario assumptions down below were included: the additional passport revenue, the reallocation of fire department personnel, is some increased planning revenue of 50,000, additional recreation program revenue of 20,000, and then increasing business license revenue by 7,500, which is a $10 increase per license. So that was our scenario 1. Since then, in April, we have some updated information. We received better estimates from AWC for medical insurance, medical insurance for next year. We had an 8% increase in the forecast originally based on historical trends. And AWC has come out with a 4 to 5. So we've moved it from 8 to 5 just to still stay conservative, which was almost a $44,000 savings. So, and tweaked some other of the non-medical ones. So that was good. And then we had some updated grant assumptions for youth and senior center revenue. So I don't know if you remember, so the 2024 deficit on that scenario 1 forecast was 455,000, and just those 2 updates have brought us down to 403,000. So that was some good news. Looking at the toolbox options and providing some updates on that.
A larger version of this document is in your packet materials that were provided ahead of the meeting. It is the April 2023 forecast toolbox with updates.
Yep. So it's the second page of the stapled packet handed out. Well, that's the recommendation. Oh, sorry, of that packet. Yes, it's of the April packet. That was in the packet prior to the meeting. So sales tax, that's looking at the public safety sales tax of the 0.1% that would be restricted for use for public safety, criminal justice. Has to go to the vote of the people. Estimated revenue is 150,000. So this could be an option to consider for 2024. We have passed the election option times for November of this year. So it would be, if for 24, you would have to do it like in the early part of next year, or it could be used for the 25-26, assuming we go to biennial budget that cycle. The property tax levy lid lift, not much new on that front. We have talked about that and how much capacity we have from $3.38, and we're currently at $1.14. Right now, based on our current AV, every 10 cents gets us about additional 110,000. So that would be something that, as we look at the strategy later, we're recommending in future budget cycles, not for 24. The EMS levy, although the EMS levy does go into the EMS fund, fire personnel are shared between fire and EMS. And so this would allow some additional reallocation. Currently, paid fire staff were at a 75-25, so 75 fire, 25. And with that scenario one, we had dropped it to a 60-40 split, recognizing that the fire chief has confirmed that fire personnel work probably more on EMS, probably more like a 30-70 or a 25-75 split. So trying to move that allocation to what's more accurately done and from a service perspective. And so that additional EMS levy revenue would go to the EMS fund, but allow for that reallocation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the strategy. B&O tax, we updated the estimated revenue. It does not have to go to voter approval up to the 0.2% maximum rate that council can institute. And we have a very conservative estimate, 160,000 at the 0.1 up to 320 for the 0.2. And that would be on all business that would be conducted in Buckley, whether it's a business based here or it's an external business, but that does business. So gross revenue for all business that is conducted in Buckley. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more at the strategy. Vehicle license fee benefits pretty much the street department only. And because general fund is not subsidizing the street fund right now, there isn't really any direct impact or benefit to the street department. So every other slide is going to work.
Next slide.
We need to budget and everything.
Yeah, right. I know. Apparently we need a new clicker. Permit fees. We have estimated this revenue at 100,000. This was at 50 in our scenario one. Staff looks to recommend to change to a cost recovery of about 80% for planning and building department. And so we'll be looking more at cost recovery of staff time and more flat fee versus kind of the deposit and bill after the fact. And that will bring in more revenue, but it'll also be better from an administrative side because we'll get more of the recovery of the revenue up front instead of having to bill out the consultants after the fact. Parks and Recreation revenue, we updated that. It originally was 20,000 in scenario one. And so we're giving a range anywhere up to 120,000. Director Snodgrass has been great at going out and just getting grants after grants for both the youth center and the senior center. And so she's working on some more that she just told me about today. So we hope that would be continue. We also look to increase venue rentals. So like marketing the Buckley Hall and doing more kind of pay for play recreation programs like softball leagues and those kind of things. Business licensing, that was included in scenario one, so no change on that at the $10 per license increase. Same with passports, that was included. That would generate anywhere from the 91 to 115,000 of additional revenue. And then prioritize economic development. This would be based on trying to bring in businesses that can help generate sales tax and or B&O tax if council choose to institute a B&O tax. So that would be having to draft some policies around allowing for people to pay for expedited review as well, if they would like the permits processed faster. A lot of cities do that, have a permit expedited track where a developer can pay to move their permits along faster for an additional fee, because a lot of times that might mean additional staff or additional consultants to be able to do that. Do you have anything to add on that one, Courtney?
Just that the model that we gave for the range of the 22,000 to the 50,000 is based off of a higher generating fast food like restaurant of $2.7 million in gross sales per year. And that range is per establishment. The 22,950 would be based just off of the sales tax rate, whereas the 50,000 would be the combination of the sales tax rate and the 1% B&O tax. So that would be per establishment year after year on an annual basis.
And then the last two are just our one-time options. We do have the remaining ARPA funds. They have to be encumbered by the end of 2024. So basically set aside by projects, 2 projects by council, and then expended, actually spent by the end of 26. Well, there is about 400,000 available in the reconciled balance of ARPA money remaining that could be tapped. And then cumulative reserve fund of 5 million. That's not necessarily a recommended option, but it is our other one-time source of funding. So that's kind of some updates on the toolbox, a few increased and updated revenue. So looking at strategy of what do we use those tools on, how to use them and when to use them. So the slide is the second page of the handout. So if you want to see a little bit bigger version of that. So B&O tax, we did talk about that. That would generate kind of a net of 102,000 or more. Again, looking at a conservative, that would be excluding small businesses. So any business that would earn 20,000 or less annually would be excluded. And it would exclude also the first 20,000 off of all businesses paying. So a business would have to earn over 20,000 to be subject to the tax. Might be appetite. Okay. Just okay. Sorry.
So that
What was it?
total for the B&O tax, it's listed here as 0.1%. It would be 1%.
At this point. Okay.
We put the math in here, not the actual percentage rate.
Sorry.
And then it would be, so the range that you can have for a councilmanic decision is up to 2%. So we would be proposing for 2024, a 1% B&O tax.
Yes, and that would be, this revenue is net of adding an additional 0.5 FTE. Speaking with many cities that have a B&O tax, most have at least a half to a full-time person that manages the program. So a lot of it is because of the compliance end, making sure you have your business licenses. Businesses have their licenses, and then making sure you have up-to-date contact information, emails, addresses, phones, to be able to contact them to ensure that they're paying their B&O tax.
Other forms of tax that we collect, sales tax, it's provided to us from the state, or we
Okay.
receive county distributions. B&O tax is collected directly by us. And so we would have to have some type of a platform established in order to do that. A lot of cities have an online payment system, for example. So in order to move that direction,
Right.
we would be looking at some infrastructure improvements as well,
Yeah.
technology wise.
How much does that system cost?
I'm meeting actually with the 6,300, but that includes permits. Is the base right now that I'm looking at. I'm meeting with them on Monday. So we'll bring forward, it's relatively low cost for the entire budget.
If I may, before you continue,
Sure.
in yesterday's admin, finance and public safety committee meeting, this same presentation was given, and what you may have heard Director Hines state about the passport services. The person that would be the passport person would also absorb the B&O tasks.
Right. The
So we're not
passport
talking about
person-
2 other people. We're talking
Yeah.
about one person to do 2 things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that person was also identified as being a halftime. So we're thinking that if the B&O tax was passed, we would be looking at hiring a full or increasing their hours to be closer to full-time.
Mhm.
It would be an administrative assistant, same level, same skill, similar skill set anyways, to be able to overdue the business licenses as well as just making sure that we're collecting the B&O tax.
And I think that is the big difference, is that the collection of it is with the city versus most all other taxes we get are paid to us through the state or through the county. So,
Easy to audit.
Yeah.
We have to-
yeah, right. They give it to us. So,
Yeah.
let's see, so where was I? Oh, so, okay, so, as Courtney mentioned, the general fund impact for 2024 would be at the 1%. And so the amounts you see in 25 and 26 are just the inflation growth on that same amount. So it's not an additional 110 in 25 on top of the 102. It's the same 102 growing. So it's assumed that it's just the 1% all 3 years. The EMS levy is resetting to the 50 cents. And so no impact for 24, because we have not gone out to the vote yet. So that would not be allowed to be collected for 24. So assuming if we went out for an EMS levy increase in 24, then the impact starts in 25. So the EMS levy revenue goes straight to the EMS fund. So what the numbers you see here are the net impact to the general fund from a savings standpoint on expenditures. So we would reallocate the paid staff down closer to the 25-75 split, as well as this would fund a 25% of a new firefighter that would also be split 25 fire, 75 EMS. So the EMS levy would be able to take care of the reallocation and pay for a new firefighter. So we'd have 2 paid full-time firefighters. Parks and recreation fee increases. So that is the 50,000. Originally, it was 20,000 in the scenario 1 forecast. So that is 50,000, then inflated to continue to grow for 25 and 26. The business license fee is just one $10 increase in 24, but growth of the amount of businesses then coming in and having licenses. So it would impact all 3 years. Development services fee increase. That was the 50,000 in scenario 1. We're recommending based on some additional work to do cost recovery, making that 100,000 impact to general fund additional revenue and kind of sustaining that over the 3-year period. Passport services, we've talked about that. That's that base first year of 95,000 in 2024, and then growing at a small inflationary rate. And then the property tax levy lid lift, not recommended for 24 or 25, probably maybe going out in 25. For 26 would probably be, we would think that
We'll
soonest.
reevaluate likely though in
Yes.
2026. So this is something that we'll be doing on an annual basis, forecasting and looking at our options to close the gap. And I think that the soonest that we'd probably be looking at a property tax levy lid lift would be moving into our next biennium, which would be starting in 2027.
Yeah.
You'd see that higher taxes.
so that you can see kind of the impact and the revenues for those different strategies. And then the next forecast that you see in your packet, and that'll hopefully show up. Oh, it did. Yay, I got it. Small up there, but yes, in your packet is the next scenario, which then includes all of the updates and those recommended strategies. So this, as you can see at the bottom, it includes the B&O tax. It includes additional planning revenue above and beyond what was in scenario 1, the additional recreation revenue above and beyond what was in scenario 1, the reallocation of the fire based on the EMS levy passing, the addition of the 0.25 portion of a new firefighter with the EMS levy passing. And then there was some one-time professional services budgeted in 23 that when I excluded all the one-times from 24 just had been missed. So I backed those out so that those weren't carrying forward. So this has brought us down with these recommended strategies from the 455,000 deficit in the baseline down to 132,000 deficit for 2024, and which then carries forward. Originally, I believe the 2029 deficit was at 1.6 million. And you can see now we're down below 1 million for that by having these strategies carry forward. Yes, Councilmember.
Question on the 1, 2, 3, fourth bullet point down, reallocation of fire EMS. Looks like 60-40 to 50-50 in 2020, 2024. And then the 25-75 fire EMS split in 2025, why not move towards the 25-75 split like next year instead of waiting for the EMS levy?
The current amount of the EMS levy revenue that's coming in couldn't support that much more of the staff being allocated to the fund. It would need the EMS levy. That's why we went to the 50-50 was kind of where we felt it was comfortable to leave, sufficient fund balance as well. If we took it much more without the EMS levy, it would push the fund too low for fund balance or push it in the hole.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions related to this slide? No?
So strategy alternatives then for still looking at that $132,000 deficit. The ARPA money for loss and recovery, we have the one-time dollars. It doesn't address the deficit or fix the structural gap, but it does get us through 24 until we can make those choices on an EMS levy and property tax levy in the future, and do more work on other revenue sources internally, not necessarily taxes, but looking at the recreation programs, looking at grants funding and those things. The property tax levy lid lift then would be an option. Surplusing property, it's one-time dollars to help with ongoing expenses, so it doesn't fix the deficit also. But it is an option of something that the council could choose to do. And then service reductions on the other side from an expenditure standpoint. Services reductions, we have the department directors look at their budgets and not necessarily impacting staff, but just what service levels would they be able to reduce? And Courtney's going to go through some of those.
So as Sandy mentioned, earlier this year, we had asked all of the departments to take a look at their budget and without impacting staffing levels, because right now I'd say that most of our departments run very lean. There is an excess of work in most every department. What services may be impacted or cuts could we see to the budget that could impact the general fund? So the next series of slides is what the department directors came up with as some potential options. Very few of them, I would say right now, are being brought forward as recommended savings, but just so you could see if we didn't start to address the deficit, what the potential impact could be or what we might be starting with for an impact. So first, starting with fire, we have eliminating the public education programs and public relations events, eliminating providing department clothing for our volunteers, deferring the replacement of minor equipment and hand tools, and then eliminating the facility use under a financial donation basis. We are recommending that we do include that as part of the 2024 fee schedule. All of our facilities will carry with them a cost to rent out the facilities, which will help with cost recovery, as well as make more of them open to the public, because we'll make sure that staff time is properly accounted for.
I will state what I stated yesterday in the admin, finance, and public safety meeting. I understand the drill, what we're doing. Eliminating providing department clothing for volunteers would deter. Our fire department is driven 98% by volunteers. It would deter young men and women from coming to have to output that. I remember when I was hired in my previous career, I had to pay for all that equipment. Other agencies had quartermaster systems and people came to the academy with their gear. I had to pay for it all, and it was an encumbrance. I stated that yesterday at the meeting, and I'll state it again, and I will die on that stake on this. But again, this is a drill that all department heads have to do. Any other council comments on this slide? This is all important stuff. Councilmember Green.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. It can eliminate department clothing. I mean, it's like you just get a t-shirt and then you're done. The firefighters go through that equipment. It gets used. And for that to be a cost that they would have to burden, that wouldn't make sense. I also think that we can't do the eliminate public education programs or the deference of the equipment, hand tools. That all has to stay the same. So yeah, looks like it's not checked in green, so I won't pontificate further on that.
So Ron, are you just looking for input on this, or are we going to wait and do input on everything?
I think we should do a slide by slide.
Oh, well, then we need to back up. if you want input on each slide as we go.
How about this?
Huh?
I will stop.
Well, I would rather go through the whole thing and then we can bring up, because we could spend a lot of time. I'd rather go through the whole presentation. Rather than have to comment on each slide as we go.
I think that's a good idea. Sounds good.
Moving forward to municipal court is very lean. The only room that they saw that they could potentially reduce would be in the training and travel budget. This is not a recommended savings, that it would bring us out of compliance with some of the rules and licensing and certification requirements for Washington State Court. For police, they do see an option of reducing professional services. The impact to that would be one of the modules, and then having to have just a different payment process for some of the community policing events that we currently have, having the officers paid directly rather than through the city of Buckley. The other options that you see is reduce vehicle repair and maintenance. This is a potential recommended cost savings. The reason being that most of our fleet is relatively new. And so we are expecting that we'll have some cost savings for the repair and maintenance, at least for next year. And then reducing the training budget. And that's because our staff are highly trained and could offer some of the trainings rather than needing to bring in some outside facilitators. For administrative services, the first option would be to eliminate the use of the ClearGov budgeting software. This would be a difficult step back, but it is a potential cost savings. We would have to convert this year as well as last year's budgets back into the Excel format, and then moving forward would have a less transparent budgeting process likely. Delaying equipment upgrades, specifically the fire department servers are on track for a catastrophic failure of hardware. And that would be the one that has been deferred and that we see as being a potential cost savings. If we chose to defer that, the impact, however, could be that they may lose the technology if that system fails entirely. And it's impossible for us to know. I've been told that the amount of function that it has is similar to an older laptop. So the RAM needs to be upgraded. Reducing professional services. This is related to, for example, our council retreat when we were able to hire the facilitator. So removing the ability to bring in outside consultants or outside facilitators for any future meetings that we may have. And then reducing the legal budget. This is the recommended savings, and that's because historically we have underspent here. And so more realistically, we're closer to the $30,000 annually. And this is for our contract legal services. Phil Ulbrichts is our contract attorney. This would not be for the public defender's contract or the contract public defenders, just for that Ulbrichts contract, as well as any union negotiations. So we do sometimes bring in additional legal services for those. So if we were to go closer to what is currently budgeted, we would have to come back to council to get additional resources there. For parks and recreation, we currently subsidize the Buckley Hall Food Bank by providing fuel for the van. We are looking into historically how this came about. There is a possibility that the van is actually ours. We're not quite sure. More investigation will tell us whether or not that's the case, but right now they are using our fuel. And so we could discontinue that. Reducing park events, specifically the number of concerts from 6 to 4 and eliminating the free community movies would be a cost savings. Ending the flower basket program. The potential savings here are equated to both the seasonal as well as the cost of the flower baskets, and then not replacing the senior center assistant, which right now is currently vacant. And there is a potential grant that we hope to hear back in September, but assuming we did not receive that grant, this would be another potential cost savings. That was a new position this year that we had filled for a very short amount of time. For planning and building, again, a relatively lean budget. A lot of the work that is currently being done in this department is done by outside consultants, and it will be moving more towards a policy-driven cost recovery-based system rather than how we've been operating historically. The only place that I could identify potential savings is related to the comprehensive plan amendments. At our last meeting, I provided a checklist that basically Puget Sound Regional Council and Department of Commerce require that we go through an exercise to say our comprehensive plan says this versus what it's mandated to say. The items identified on the checklist are much way less than what we've identified as a group of items we'd like to address. For example, the UGA, wildlife corridors, future land use maps, reevaluating the zoning. If we were to scale back on our comprehensive plan amendments this year or moving into next year and only do the mandated checklist items, there are some potential cost savings, but I think that would be, it's not recommended because I think that we're really just kind of kicking the bucket down and we're potentially losing an opportunity to have our plan certified with PSRC and Department of Commerce with those things that make Buckley really unique and that we'd like to see happen in the future. Last for next steps, we've included here is just the budget calendar in general with some additional dates filled in with the B&O taxes, which are at the same time that you would have already reviewed the revenue sources and the property tax. So the next time that we will be reviewing this is throughout September. We can also bring this back forward next week, just as a general conversation item for feedback. But with our regular budget calendar, September is typically the time that we start having the committee meetings. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that we have done a forecast and started to look forward and ahead. And so some of this might change next year, but this is something that we will be doing annually. We know that you probably aren't going to be able to provide us with all of your answers and feedback tonight. And so we have plenty of time before we present a preliminary budget. However, if you do have any initial feedback, we would love to hear it because we are currently working on trying to create a balanced budget. And starting next week, we'll be meeting with department directors as they ask for their additional items this year for the budget and then bringing those all to you in September.
So thank you for that presentation, both Director Hines and Mrs. Brunel. Let's go around the table with council members with questions, comments on this topic.
I'd like to go with it.
Okay. Councilmember Green, anything on the presentation?
Oh, man, I have to be first. Let's see.
To go later.
If
Yeah,
you're
I
not
have a
ready.
question on the B&O tax. You mentioned that this would affect both businesses that are like located in Buckley or businesses that do business in Buckley. They may not be like domiciled here.
Mhm.
Do we know the ratio of those businesses? Like, are there more that are just doing business here, or are there more that are actually like located in Buckley?
Significantly more that are non-resident.
Okay,
So our brick and mortar businesses are less than half of those that are currently registered and licensed in the city of Buckley. So our city of Buckley business licensees, there's about 700, and I'm not sure exactly how many are brick and mortar, but it's less than half.
okay.
And for this calculation, we were conservative. We did, of course, remove all of those that were 20,000. Then we only took a percentage of the gross sales from those that were non-resident because it would only be based off of the gross sales of the work that they do here in Buckley.
Okay.
We also had a version that completely eliminated them, but we found that that wasn't the case. We would absolutely be able
Yeah.
to collect tax from our non-resident business licensees.
Other council comments? Councilmember Asano.
On the B&O tax, we did all these things to try to help the downtown association. Would this be like setting them back?
It would be 1% of their gross sales revenue. And so it would be an additional cost to the businesses.
And two, the passport thing, I mean, to me, that would be something we would try to absorb ourselves without hiring people.
We currently, there's currently 4 of the staff are certified to do passports, and usually 2, Jessica and Michelle, do the majority of them right now. And we do them 3 days a week. And when we have a lot of appointments, they're probably doing anywhere from 7 to 10 appointments a day. And at anywhere from 10 if it's just a single, up to maybe 20 minutes per appointment if there's multiple or minors and stuff. And so it's not that we couldn't continue to do what we're doing. We can do more appointments and generate more money by having the staff person, and it would free up our current staff just to be able to get their job done, because every time that they're you're working and you have a passport appointment and then you come back to work and 15 minutes later you have another passport appointment and then you come back to your desk and then maybe 30 minutes later you have another passport. I mean, so they're constantly interrupted. And so just from a productivity standpoint, we'd be able to do more. And the revenue that's showing is net of the cost of the person. So the 100,000 is after we've already paid that person to be there. It's an additional 100,000 on top of paying after we pay them.
We're turning people away right now for passports and.
Or pushing them so
scheduling-
far out that, yeah,
scheduling
they're
several
like,
weeks
yeah.
out. Next week, we'll be bringing a revision to the taxes, rates and fees schedule to start including photos. So we purchased that so we can start charging $15 for every photo, become a one-stop shop. We've done zero marketing. Our neighboring communities do not offer passport services. And so we do think that this is a bit of an untapped resource for us to generate additional revenue. But we've, I think, maxed out our current staffing for how many they can take on.
I will say, and I said this yesterday at the committee meeting, that I got my passport in 1982, and as a 17-year-old kid, I had to go to downtown Seattle to the Jackson Federal Building, and it was my first experience with Seattle PD because I went the wrong way on Second Avenue.
Yes.
And it turned into a parking garage, didn't know any better. If we can market this and have these neighboring communities that are not offering this, this is an excellent, no, who wants to go 45 miles away or even to Tacoma? If we can do that here and they don't have to go to Walgreens or wherever to get your crazy little picture, and we could do it right here, one-stop shopping. I mean, to me, that's beautiful. A new service for revenue. Councilmember Burbank.
So I guess I'm after doing some more research, I'm a little uncomfortable with the B&O tax only because our downtown and our Buckley isn't exactly thriving yet. And so my question is, what if instead of the B&O tax, it was replaced with the permit fees? Because the estimated revenue on permit fees is 100,000. And it's not quite the same amount as the B&O. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of other things where we're not affecting businesses.
So the strategy that we provided with the recommendations includes the increased permit fees.
Oh, that's
So this
what is that
toolbox-
under?
The toolbox recommendations is the second page of the packet that was provided tonight, and it was on the earlier slide. So for
Which-
us to get to the point of having the forecasted $132,000 deficit, we would be implementing a B&O tax, doing an EMS levy in 2025, increasing revenue for Parks and Rec, increasing business licenses, increasing or doing more accurate cost recovery for development services, implementing the passport services. That's it.
So
All of those things. The B&O, but the B&O tax, there is some flexibility there. So we could do less than 1%. We could, based off of NAICS, so different types of industry, you could
Mhm.
choose to exempt certain businesses. You could increase the threshold for $20,000 is your model ordinance minimum. So $20,000 is the minimum that we have to exempt. We could choose to do more. If you turn to the last page of the packet materials that were provided to you in advance of the meeting, we've given you some rates of other cities. To my knowledge, I think that this is a comprehensive list of cities in Washington state that have a B&O tax.
It
So
is.
it's certainly not every city, not even our neighboring cities. We had a B&O tax that was repealed in 2006 and the revenue source was never replaced. But you can see what their rate is. If there's any rate that's over the 0.002, that means that they either went out to the voters or they were grandfathered in. But you can see that the tax threshold, quarterly or annual, it varies. And so the council could choose to modify the threshold, and we could run some different scenarios of if you were to do a 2% B&O tax on only businesses that generated, X number of dollars, what that would generate versus the 20,000 model that we've given today at the 1%. The reason that we recommended 1% was because there is room for growth depending on the outcome of some of the other measures. And in an effort, again, to address the deficit with permanent solutions rather than one-time fixes, this seemed to be the most straightforward way that didn't require voter approval and is something that we've historically seen happen in Buckley and that we've historically repealed. So if we did in the future have additional economic development, a slew of new businesses, a booming economy, we could repeal it in the future, or we could modify it to something similar to, the city of Bremerton, where they're threshold is anything over annually over $1 million pays into a B&O tax. We can modify it as we see fit. Anytime really after, well, on an annual basis, once per year, please. Yeah.
So at the 20,000,
Mhm.
do we have an estimate of how many brick and mortar businesses that would affect?
I can get you that number.
Okay.
We didn't do that yet, but
Councilmember Green.
So going back to, you said economic development, it goes that, it's a good segue into my question. So I noticed that prioritizing economic development didn't make it into the strategy, and I understand the lead time with, getting new places through the process and up and running could kind of drag on for a couple of years, but why isn't that part of the strategy now?
Frankly, because I view it as a bit of a given and we still have $132,000 deficit that I'm hoping we can have economic development help close. So one example is the McDonald's, right? We're estimating that that's going to bring in 22, depending on B&O tax, to $50,000 per year. As we continue to see permits increase or build, commercial activity increase, we're continuing to have a deficit. So I think that prioritizing economic development in some ways needs to continue to be a priority of the city. And I feel like it is. Unfortunately, we're very understaffed in trying to correct that. But ultimately, I think that regardless, the reason that you don't see B&O taxes in other cities is because they have more economic development. They have a larger sales tax base. And so they're able to get their revenue that way.
For the update part, it says draft policies to allow for expedited permit review, move towards hybrid work options, would require a new permit software. What's the cost of that new software?
Possibly the same one. So we're evaluating
Okay.
some options right
Okay.
now for softwares. There's some that are one-stop shop. There's some that are custom. I worked previously with Pierce County software and I'm working with them to see if they'd be willing to fit it towards Buckley. We do relatively low permit volume per year. And so it's just a matter of finding the right fit for our needs, but we'd love to find a software that could kind of do everything that we need.
Okay.
Perhaps even our financial system, depending on which company we go with, and upgrading some softwares across the board. That one that I spoke with today, and I have several meetings next week, it was just under 7,000.
Okay. I mean, personally, I'd like to see it on the list just as like a placeholder, and then even if we can expand the items that fall into that category, and that could come from us, or if you have great ideas, please bring it to the table. Because it seems like if we snag a few more, high grossing places, then like we're sitting pretty.
We can
Get closer.
build the one business that we know is coming into the forecast. But aside from that, I would probably just keep it as a listed item, but
Yeah.
not impact the numbers because it is market driven.
Mhm.
And it does, as you mentioned, first take several years from the date that permits are applied until they start generating taxes to happen. So it's difficult to forecast that,
Yeah,
But-
that makes sense.
but we can certainly add it to the list. It's just something we're considering. And then with what we know is currently in the pipeline.
Councilmember Tremblay.
First of all, I agree with that recommendation. That is just recovering costs. And it's something that we should have in order to help the larger developers and the larger businesses. I am concerned, as I've heard from the chamber and from the tables here, about the B&O tax. When I look at the list, and I want to point this out to everybody, what you don't see on this list is Fording, Sumner, Bonnie Lake, South Prairie, Carbonado, or Wilkeson. That tells me that all of our neighbors do not have a B&O tax. So that's one concern, and people have a choice of where they're going to put their business. So I want us to be aware of that. The other thing is I would like to see the baseline substantially higher than what we're saying. I could go with the 500K. I don't know what our businesses are generating, but to me, the mom and pop businesses that we have shouldn't have to pay more money to be here. They're already working hard. Part of the reason the Buckley Market's leaving is they just couldn't make it. We need to be as business friendly as we can. So my suggestion would be to find out what's that break point. Is it 500,000? It might be $1 million. But if we're going to put it on the books, and that may eliminate the revenue we're looking at, but I think that's a more realistic view for us to take. because we want to support small business. And in order to do that, we can't take more money away from them, because that's basically what you're doing. You're taking the money out of the pockets of the small businesses. So that would be my recommendation, because if not, and I'm looking, going here or Bonnie Lake or even South Prairie, I might make my decision to go there. So that was that. I am glad that we're not going out for a vote on anything right now, because as long as we have a reserve, that is our reserve at this point, I can't recommend to anybody to vote for increasing property taxes or any of that. There may come a point where we need to look at it, but I couldn't support a voter increase on property taxes and whatnot. We're paying through the nose now for all the programs that are out there. The other thing, development service fees increase, I would actually take that up from 80%. If we're going to look at anywhere, it's the developer that should be paying for the work that we're doing for them. We don't have that work to do if they're not doing something. I'd look at 100% cost recovery if it's not against the law, because that's what we should be doing. If they don't come in and want to build something, we shouldn't have to lose money, and we're losing money on every one of those. So my recommendation, looking at this, is, the other thing is business license fee. To piss a bunch of people off for $7,500 is not worth it. Okay, it's so small amount that you're adding another fee that, again, I'm one of them. I do contract work, and I know it's $10, but it's $10 I'm not paying now, and my revenue is zero, so I'm $10 in the hole for this year. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to point out, and I understand the passport services, and I'll agree with you, Ron, it's a service. It is not one of our core missions as a town to provide passport services. But if we can make it an enterprise that brings in money to help us with our budget balance, 100% for it. And charge whatever you want, because people are, again, going to make a decision. Do I pay $50 here or drive up to Seattle and waste a day for 15? But I just want to point out, it's not a core service of the city of Buckley. It is a service that we provide, especially for our elderly and those that are homebound. But it's not something we're doing it for profit. And I just want to be upfront that we're doing it for profit, because I don't want there to be an expectation down the road when it becomes too expensive to do it, or we're not making money on it, that we can't get rid of the service. It's an expectation. So, and I would make the recommendation that if we had to, get rid of the B&O tax or putting a high level and, don't have the license fees and some of these other things, I could live with a 5% dip into the reserve if we had to get us through this year. We have a new city manager that has been given this palette. And I know it doesn't look good for the coming years, but I'm confident we're going to work on that. We haven't talked a lot about service cuts, and the ones we have are nickel and dime. They're really not worth doing. So that would be my recommendation is, Parks and Recreation. That could be another enterprise that makes money. Adult volleyball, adult basketball, something our community loves. And people are used to paying $150 a season or whatever for that. And those are usually self-sustaining, I would hope. And work with the school district to get Wickersham Gym or some of the facilities that we talked a little bit today about. The city fields aren't a city fields, and they've always been the city fields. It changed in 2020, I guess. But using those and providing that service, again, it is part of Parks and Recs. I see that as part of our responsibility, actually, to provide activities for elderly and the grown-ups. I want to make sure we keep in mind kickball in that discussion. Red ball in Fort Lauderdale for 20 to 35-year-old kids is number one. And it's a lot of fun and it gives them a good outlet. The problem is trying to keep them from drinking while they're playing red ball, but that's a different discussion. Like I say, for me, no B&O or a high limit B&O. I'm not gonna say no, I'm gonna say, we find out what that number is, that we don't charge mom and pop businesses. And I don't have enough business acumen to tell you that number. I'm sure somebody at the chamber could tell you, they would know. You know, you don't want to lose the antique shops, the Waylands and, you know, the little businesses that to us provide a service. I love going in there and looking at their stuff. So, any questions on any of that?
Other council comments on this budget presentation? Councilmember Anderson?
I was just going to say, we did so much work back when we got the ARPA dollars to allocate all of that. And I know in this presentation, it's just an alternative, but would we obviously go back to that list and see again? Because I feel like we haven't looked at that again. I feel like all I heard about was the small business allocations and then that was it. So would we look at that again before we would dip in there?
That would be the hope that at the end of 2024. So the first and foremost, the ARPA dollars were meant for loss and recovery for cities. So if we're not able to balance our general fund, that is the intention of the ARPA dollars, as well as the easiest way for us to handle the reporting of ARPA dollars. And so our hope would be at the end of or during next year, depending on how all of these other factors weigh in, we would be able to look back and see how much ARPA we have remaining. And then we have to have that identified for how we're going to spend it for the 2025-2026 biennium.
Okay.
So we have a little bit more time and I would hesitate to commit any of those dollars only because I know that there was a lot of community input and hope that those allocations would happen. And I don't think right now we can guarantee it because we do continue to have a deficit even with the implementation of the B&O tax, for example, as it's presented today. So if we don't increase our revenue base, ARPA is the easiest solution for us to fill that gap.
And then the only other thing, a totally different comment is you asked all the directors to go through their budgets and what I see, I mean, making cuts in there, what they can, I feel like we should keep it. And I know maybe we can't, but I feel like we should keep it fair. If we're asking fire and police to make cuts, then all the other functions need to somewhere because that's taking away from our safety in our town. And one of our council goals was public safety is highest on our list. So that was my only thing. But thank you, Sandy, for the presentation.
Anybody else before I dive in? I'm in agreement with Councilmember Tremblay on a higher threshold for a B&O tax. I know, I imagine that there are at least a handful of businesses in this town that are raking at a very high level and they should pay their fair share. And I do not believe that when we have a recently opened haircutting business on Main Street that is trying to gather steam, that we should, and again, the 20,000 model in here is admirable. We should be having those that are doing very well paying a B&O tax and not subjecting a B&O tax to people that are just getting by or just getting started up. Something I heard about the Buckley Market not making it, that's a convoluted thing, and that has something to do with the ownership of that entire block, not so much so that they couldn't make it. And I agree with Councilmember Anderson that before we cut anything in public safety, we need to look at other things. And there's just we're just getting to the point where we have adequate law enforcement staffing. And the equipment has been replaced. Cutting the training budget would be a serious mistake because anytime that there is any critical incident where there's a lawsuit, they're going to be focusing on training. We have no training budget, then it gives the city liability, or if you cut the training. And I appreciate city administrator. Yes, we have experts. As long as we can document that we have training, if we can do it in-house, that's fine. But I think that's something that ambulance chasers down the road could come and capitalize on. Mr. Mayor, did you have some comments?
Yeah, I did some quick goat math here on the B and O tax. Just breaking this down, I mean, it seems kind of a misnomer, the 2.7 million, obviously that's for a large establishment pulling in a lot of money. I don't know what our various businesses, pull in gross, and nor is it our business really. But the threshold is not a bad idea. Obviously, that's going to impact the revenue that we get from it. But just my quick goat math here, I broke it down to a business roughly bringing in $700,000 a year. Whoever fits in that window would be paying somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000 a year, so $500 to $1,000 a month for a business that's bringing in $750,000, somewhere right in that range, depending how we structure the B&O. So that may put somebody out. Really, it could happen. It doesn't seem like that's a huge amount of money, but it is. When it's your business or my business, obviously that's a substantial impact. So that's something we'll certainly work through. But just to bring it down to more Buckley standards, the 2.7 million seems like a big number to tackle. So I just kind of divided it down twice.
Well, if I could follow up. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm thinking of the OKQs and Aero Lumbers of the world. To them, 1% is not a lot, but to the Wayans antiques and even the fitness centers and all that, they're 1% could be a lot. That's all I'm saying is, and I don't know what that number is, and I would guess though, if you did a high number, you wouldn't lose very much money because those people don't make that much anyway.
Right.
Most of your volume, I'd be curious what the volume of revenue is within the city limits. To me, is going after alumna, going after the contractors, going after, maybe the storage people, but I don't know what that number is. I think it would take more but I think it would respond to the council's concern. Because most of the businesses on Main Street wouldn't fall into that category, I would guess, Anyway.
I have a question. There are two businesses in town that the county collects taxes from that, well, the taxes are collected and they're no longer, they're divided via capita across the county. So those taxes that they pay for those businesses, would they be subject to a B&O
It's a great question.
on top of?
Oh, you mean the RV place and
No,
oh,
I would think, I would think, yes. I would think, yes. My understanding is that all retail sales looking at the MRSC but there may be some exception because that is such a unique business. So I don't know the answer for sure. We'll look into it.
Just a thought. And
Yeah.
they were those type of businesses that we have here that other jurisdictions have a high volume amount of
Gross sales.
gross sales. So given their unique, that's why I asked the question.
Yep. I know.
Councilmember
yeah,
Tremblay.
along those lines, where does the RV and alumna fall in? Because my understanding is we don't get sales tax because there's just storage yards, but there's a lot of activity and a lot of dollars going through there. Are we missing out, or would we
Possibly.
be missing out on that money? Because there's a ton of RV repairs going on. And there's a lot of scaffolding going out of that yard every day. And my understanding, they're not paying us because their headquarters are somewhere else.
Yeah.
And they're paying taxes there. I think everything that comes in and out of our city You know, this may be a legislator thing.
Yeah.
And the work is happening here.
It
We
should-
We should get money.
If the work is happening here, it's sales tax is destination based. So if they're doing the work here in Buckley and charging the people and they're paying here in Buckley, then the sales tax should get
I
reported to
don't think
us.
they're
But if
paying
they're
here. I
doing
think
here
they're
and they're
doing the work
taking it,
And
then,
they're paying somewhere else.
so that,
I don't
the same
know.
argument is made for Amazon, right?
Yeah.
We receive the
Yeah.
sales tax for Amazon
it's
deliveries in
destination
Buckley
based.
because it's destination
Yeah.
based. And so a B and O tax is really the only way, aside from property tax,
Yeah.
that we would
Anyway,
collect additional.
those are two
businesses.
businesses that I know of. Especially the alumni, because I think they're just saying, we're just storing it. No, they're prepping the stuff. They're loading it and sending it out. There's a lot of traffic from them.
Mayor.
Yeah, I know we've touched on that particular business multiple times and I don't think we've ever really dug into it, but yeah, if they're based in Tukwila, whatever, wherever they bill out of.
Yeah.
Is where and when we went through this orchestration with Arrow before too. Because if they bill here, they actually, the tax rate is lower here, so it benefits their customers, so it would benefit them, but they may not know that.
Yeah.
So that's a whole.
We can review it for compliance, but unfortunately, that is one thing that we're unable to report publicly is anything related to taxes for specific businesses.
Mhm.
So we're bound by confidentiality on that. So we can look to make sure enforcement wise that they're licensed the way that they should and that their taxes are being paid in a legal manner.
Well-
But we cannot come back and really report on any
Well, to
specific
the
business.
point that Bo made, it may be beneficial to them to bill out of here.
Yeah, to
They
talk
could
to them,
save,
and,
they could save 2%.
yeah, their customer, and they can
Yeah,
cut that up however way they want to slice it, but.
there may be an education piece.
Any other comments on the budget forecast?
So we will bring back some scenarios related to the B and O tax specifically as soon as next week with just some different options and then math of what that would look like for specific businesses roughly.
And eliminate this, the business license. increase.
Yes, we can eliminate the $7,500 as well.
Anything else before we move on to City Hall? Seeing and hearing none? Mrs. Brunel, please proceed on the City Hall remodel update, and this was at your request of Councilmember Arsenal.
So what was included in your packet was what we reviewed at the last meeting. I don't have any additional information aside from, according to our consultants, we do have a window to avoid escalation for going out for bid. And that would be for either of the alternatives. They're thinking by October timeline, we would avoid escalation. Outside of that, they think for budget safety, they would be looking at an additional 6% for total escalation. And that would be towards the end of this year. And then we could reevaluate early next year, but it's really difficult to judge where the market's headed. So right now, if we were to receive council direction one way or another, our goal would be to try to get documents ready to go out to bid in October.
Questions, comments from council on the Champ City Hall Edition Modernization Project, Champ.
I reserve my comments to the end because I know it'll take a while.
What's an assessment cost of like our needs? Like where you have someone come in and assess our, because it keeps getting tossed back and forth about building a new building, remodeling, because what the citizens want. It's so like messy. Is there like that comes in and just says, okay, you guys need 10 offices for the future,
There are certainly consultants that do that, and I don't believe that we've ever hired one to come in and do a space assessment for any of our buildings or administrative staff. What our team has done with the architect is take a look at what the existing space is and what our needs are, assuming that there was some work done with digitization and the number of staff that we have to build out for full population. And so that's how we've based the existing floor plans, but we haven't hired a specific consultant to come in and say, for your type of work, you should have this amount of square footage. They've based it all off of standard square footage for office spaces, and then what we have and what we expect to have in the next through 2040.
So what I will say on this is we've been around the bush on this a little bit. We went out to bid, we rejected bids because we did not like them. The first iteration did not include a second addition or an additional part of City Hall remodel to bring in planning and development. And this space here, and many of you have been here when it is the senior center. And I've never been here when it's a court. But this would be an opportunity. And this is the east side of town. This is the major part of the city of Buckley's on this side of town. That building that is City Hall used to be the library back in the day.
It was the Women's Literary Club before that.
Well, it's been a lot of things, and I think it's a historical building. I heard that somewhere earlier today. For basically under $3 million to get a space, and with all the engineering upgrades that will be required, that would give us enough workspace, storage space for our staff that will only grow, because remember, we've done this whole growth management thing we have to do by the end of next year. We're going to build out at 8,500, whatever it is. Do not think for 1 second that does not mean we're going to not need more people to process the services. It would be a shame not to go forward with the bids for the remodel of the current City Hall. I could live without the parking lot. We have a lot of street parking. I could live without the metal roof. You could get a 25-year roof and then you're looking at 20 grand, right? I could live without those two things. There's no way that this, I believe, there's no way to gauge this, but based on what I know about this town, I don't believe anybody would approve of us spending $6.5 to $8 million on a new City Hall someplace other than downtown, when we can remodel what we already have. People in this town do with what they have. They've always done with what they have. They have to remodel their place, they do it. My 2 cents. Councilmember Orsano.
Mine's not questioning the space, it's questioning the timing of the coming into a budget deficit and everything, of actually spending the money for the 2.8 at this time. Is what I struggle with, like pulling the money out of the utilities seems the water line, like we talked about in our meeting, but we can't even water the parks because we're low on water right now in the summertime. So, I mean, there's upgrades that are gonna have to be done that are more important for long-term City Hall.
Anybody else before we get to Councilmember Tremblay? Please go ahead.
Okay, I want to apologize because I wasn't involved early on when the decision was made to remodel. I've had a lot of experience in remodeling old buildings, and I mentioned at the utilities meeting, the only time I could make a remodel pay off is because it's a historical building. If it's not historical, you're not going to remodel a building. It gets down to infrastructure. It gets down to abatement issues. It gets down to, I gave the example, my house is 100 years old. You would not want to try to replace all the wiring and the piping and all of the infrastructure of that building. I look at this and I look at what it was, and I understand the walkability thing, and I have a way of addressing that could be acceptable. But for what's the square footage?
3,800.
3,800, under 4,000 square footage. How many of you have been through or driven by Ordings City Hall? Okay, that's 12,000 square feet. I looked it up, 6.5 mil is what they spent on it. But has their chambers, city hall, courtroom, everything. And I think if we spend 2.5 million on something that's gonna look like an old building that somebody added wings to and crammed on a little lot, I think we're doing a disservice to our community. Because at best, the remodel might be a 20-year solution. It right now doesn't have enough space. And it's chopped up because you're trying to work it within a given structure. To build a true city hall that we can all be proud of. My suggestion is we look at, and I understand we spent 150,000 on the plans we've done today. I'll let you know the change order for Hinkleman is going to be 120,000. So, you know, you don't continue to go down the path that is not the right path. I would rather us take a couple months, get a good plan for a new building that accommodates this, because like we all know, it's going to grow. The senior center is going to want to use this, right? We're going to want a good chamber for our council meetings. I would suggest, and you made the mistake of telling me that that's what Marvin wanted to do, but I would suggest that we put it right next to the Eagle on River Road, across from the maintenance hall, and build something that you can see from Highway 10 that says Buckley City Hall, we're loud and proud, and it's in the range of 8,000 to 10,000 square feet. So that means 4 to 5 million. Okay. So you're going to spend, and I had this discussion with the community here when we were trying to build a new high school. You want to remodel the old high school for 9 mil, or do you want to spend 20 mil on a new high school and have something that's going to last for 50 years, already 25? So my suggestion is that, and something else, when I read the report on the budget, the bid, the contractor said if it would have been earlier or later, the bids would have been better. So if we take a couple of months, reboot our thinking, do a long-term solution, this is where I think we ought to put some of the PSE money. It is how we can give to the community something that's visible, something that says, this is what we did with it. Because if we sit here as a city with 5 million in reserve, every time we try to balance the budget, we'll never get a voter approval. So we need to spend some of that money in a legitimate way that takes care of our storage, our people for the next 30 to 50 years. There's also a concern I have. When I built buildings on the university campus, we had to prove a 50-year service life, because when we got money from the state, you have to prove that it's designed to last 50 years. We could not with confidence say that this building will last 20 years. It's a 20-year roof. On most of the buildings we design, we put a 30 to 50-year roof on. Yeah, your ABS roof is going to last you maybe 10, 15. So my suggestion is take a step back. We look at a site that makes sense, that's walkable. The site I'm thinking about is right next to the post office, where everybody in town goes once a day anyway. And this town, the way it's developing, my urban planning part of me says, our town is River Road and Main Street. That's the walkable thing. You walk down foothills, we have businesses, we develop businesses and activities along River Road. I've talked about it before. We moved the maintenance yard down to the sewer thing eventually. And again, we can expand that or have that be commercial, because it makes no sense for a community to have a maintenance yard on prime property. It can exist anywhere. So anyway, any questions on that? There's a laundry list. Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk about, if we do anything, we need to make sure that we do energy, solar. We do the best quality lead stuff for environmental design. We have to have electric parking, which you guys have got charge stations. The benefit of doing what I'm talking about, you got parking space. We developed parking space along River Road that would serve the city hall. Tons of it. And during the day, a lot of it. So that's my push. We can talk more about it, but I think we need to be on River Road, and I think we need to be in a new building that we can all say, this is it. And this is what you're getting for your PSC money. There's another strategy I'd like to put out there. Even if we don't use the money, you can do interfund transfer and borrow the money from ourselves. Okay, the 5 million we got, we could borrow that at 5% and get 5% into our coffers instead of the 2% we're getting now. You can confirm that for me, but I believe that's a doable thing. University did it all the time. We take money we have sitting around and we loan it to ourselves because you don't get as much money from the banks. You're just supporting the bank. It's like you're borrowing from your equity at a lower rate. So something else to think about when we talk money on this. So if you would have gotten to 2.5 or maybe not, and we add, it'll be 4 to 5. We don't have as much parking to develop. We can have a pretty good building in laminated timber or something that's really elegant. That was something else too. If we do this and move forward, I would suggest we look at a different design team, because having an engineer be the lead on a design of a building, it makes my architecture self go bananas, because engineers know how to make structures. Architects know how to design spaces. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'm sorry it comes so late, but I didn't get on here till later.
Any comments related to the last or Councilmember Tremblay's, Councilmember Burbank?
So your suggestion would be moving it to past the Liberty pole, but like towards like where Cascade, that like that side of it? Like I'm just trying to envision what
the west side of the Eagle, yeah.
Okay.
And on River Road.
Okay.
Still leave it open for recreation and whatnot along the foothills trail.
And like
But-
where like I'm thinking of the plaza that we talked about and all that, it would be on the.
Oh,
Okay,
it's way
okay.
away from that, and
Okay.
and I know there's plans for a performance venue there, so you're starting to have a really cool area.
Okay.
And then if you think about it in the future, if you had to use, and even in the interim, if you had to use the maintenance building with the conference rooms as an interim place, or even for file storage, you could do that. You know, and like I say, it just starts to build a community center. The other thing I didn't bring up that, but I get these thoughts in my head all the time. Then we can look at the city hall now and look at the potential for senior housing there. And think of that site, either converting that building for senior housing or food banks or something, or demolishing the old building and putting senior housing right next to the senior center. And maybe putting out an RFP and selling it to a developer who would come in and buy that, and potentially value that 1 to 1.5 mil. You're paying for part of the city hall by doing that. So just like I say, I apologize. That's the way my mind works. It's what I've done for 40 years. Okay, I can't stop doing it.
So right now we have $5 million in our reserve account. If we go back to the PowerPoint, I was able to provide what is kind of industry standard, I would say, according to MRSC, of a healthy reserve account. And that ranges anywhere from 10% on the low end, 25% on the high end. So I think any less than $1 million in that account, and we're probably not in the best practice,
Yeah.
$1 to $2 million. And so that would leave us with a balance of roughly $3.5 million of being able to potentially use for a capital project. The alternative that we discussed at the last meeting for the cost of a new building is $5.25 million. That was the median range. Dom had estimated that it would be between $4.5 to $6 million. Without identifying the site, it would be really difficult to know what the site improvements would be. And so square footage alone, average would be $600 per square foot. So fine, we would likely have to go out for a bond in order to do that. So we would be paying for some interest just because we wouldn't have enough in our cumulative reserve to fully fund a project like that. Right now, with the alternatives that we have before us, and that's certainly still an alternative, is if we want to go with the base design, which we could potentially fund in full without needing to use the cumulative reserve, or use a portion of the cumulative reserve up to $700,000 to fund the two additions. And so we are proposing a use of the cumulative reserve. We are also proposing a portion of cost allocation to be shared by the utilities, but that's up to the council. So my recommendation, because I feel like we've been going around this a lot over the last couple of months, would be to bring forward a design contract for the second edition. So step one is the second edition gets designed for you to review. And if you choose not to approve that, then we can go back out to bid with the design documents that we already have and see where the bids end up as of October of this year. If you choose to approve it, then we have a fighting chance of making that October deadline. But if we don't approve it soon, then that's going to be less realistic. And then at that time, you can decide if you want to scrap this project entirely and look elsewhere, or if you want to continue to move forward with the project that we've already invested some money into, and that we can currently finance without having to go out for a bond.
Councilmember Asano.
Well, we keep talking about tax and citizens, and then we're gonna spend 5 million, I mean, I don't know about going for a bond for $6 million. Just don't make very much sense right now.
And the idea of borrowing from ourselves, I think is a great idea, but right now we are facing a deficit. And so I don't know how quickly I just want to be realistic. I don't know how quickly we could guarantee that we would be able to reimburse anything that we take right now from the cumulative reserve. So if you're taking that 700,000, if you're taking that 3.5 million, whatever the sum amount is, don't consider it replenished anytime in the near future. I think right now we have an annual contribution of 20,000, which we didn't even do in 2023 because we're facing a deficit. And so consider it spent, right? And right now with the 700,000 up to 3.5 million, I think that we're still in that industry standard of where we would want our reserve account to be, but any less than that, and we're just in risky territory.
And I will say there is a challenge here because we don't show the ability to replenish our reserves. When we look forward right now, we're getting worse. We're not getting better. So it is prudent for us to have at least 20% in there. But again, I feel adamant that the PSC money should go to something that is tangible, visible, and that our community can use for the next 30 to 50 years. It's a one-time deal, but I think between what we have and what we need, I don't think we're going to be at the 600. I think we're going to be at the 500 number because we wouldn't have a lot of site work because of the parking that's already there and some of the utilities that are already there. So I'm optimistic that we can, if we keep this at 8,000 with the court and everything, you're 4 million.
Mr. Mayor.
No, do you know when they built Ording?
I believe it's about 3 years ago. So,
Yeah.
there'd be some inflation, but I think now the market has kind of peaked out from construction. Like we got on the bids, the last bids we got, they made the comment, if you wait till next year, it'll probably be lower. It's saturated, the markets, house builders are backing off. There's going to be availability of crews. And that's my trade, is estimating and knowing the market. And so, I see it maybe stabilizing, probably not going back, but stabilizing.
According to their market analysis, we need to bid it in October. If we wait into next year, it'll be the new fiscal year and they're going to be lining up new projects. That's not my wheelhouse.
Well, but even again, penny wise, pound foolish. If we try to save, like I said, the 150,000 we've invested in this, we try to save that and we have a solution. It's not the right one. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with you there. I do tend to agree with Kenny that this is a hard pill to swallow at 2.5 million and to even to go to 4, I think we're gonna have a hard push to get this 2.5 through. So to me, the other thing is completely out of the question, but that's just my read on
Yeah.
the community,
Yep.
so.
And again, my comment would be you spend 2.5 now and 10 years ago, you gotta come up with 2.5 more and we don't have it.
This is supposed, this design will, should we go with plan 1 or this extra addition into plan 2, however we're phrasing it, is projected to, the other problem with going to a 6 million or 4 million or whatever it would be. We've been kind of doing this piecemeal as we can afford it through the community. We did the fire station. In fact, a lot of we've got a AA rating on our bond. So we pay a lot less interest on until that fire station is paid for. The fire station is done through build out.
Yeah.
This is kind of our next, then we still got a police station that wouldn't go into this structure.
Yeah.
But we're gonna overspend in the beginning and then not catch up at the tail. So
Sure,
lot to consider for everybody.
I get that. And that rating is important. It's like your credit rating.
Yep.
I would state that 4.5, 5 years ago, there was a proposal on the table out there in the same space where my colleague proposes that we put a new city hall, and this community was outraged over that Tarragon project. And they don't want that space messed with. And I would say that at the corner of Main and A, that is a prominent spot. You got, Main and A has always been a prominent spot. And we have that building, and when it was built, I guarantee you it was built way better. Some of the stuff they might have used might not be good for us. But I guarantee you it's got better bones than what they're going to make right now. And when they come in and retrofit on today's standards, it will last more than 10 years. It will. And I do not believe that this community has an appetite to spend that kind of money for a new building that is 8,000 to 10,000 square feet. I don't know how they did it in Orion. I don't know where it was before, and I'm familiar where it's at there. But right now, people are posting on social media looking for a place to live, to rent. And this is my budget, and it's laughable. It's not there. So we got to be mindful of where we're at. We're in Buckley. We're not in Sammamish. We're not in Clyde Hill or whatever it is. That's all. Anybody else? Actually, we're in air conditioning with fans. It's actually nice in here. We walk outside, it's going to be brutal. Anything else on tonight?
Does Councilmember Rose have anything?
Councilmember Rose, I'm sorry. I forgot about you.
She does, but I just didn't know.
Good call.
Can you hear me
Anything
now?
else? Anything from you, Councilmember Rose?
I think that this in the short time we have, we need to bear down on this and get this clear in our heads, what we want to do, all of us, and move forward by October. I really feel strongly about that. I think we need to talk about that and that only, if possible, in another, if we could jam in another special session or something and just resolve this thing. And, I think we do, there's so many issues involved with it, but there's the philosophical almost and financial certainly. I'd kind of like us to settle it and move forward. And I think it's going to be needs to be a more informal, like tonight, where you just express what you feel, and maybe we can take at least a nod, head nod, a vote on some kind of a consensus for it. So we can know where we all are on this. I don't know if that's good thinking or not, but that's what I feel.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear her too good. It's a little garbled. Treva, could you read that back, what she said, or no?
To summarize, sorry.
I believe she said that she believes that we should go out for the bid in October. And
Well,
she would like to have another study session, an informal setting like we are tonight, to discuss it more.
So to meet an October deadline, I'm not sure when we would schedule an additional study session. So
I know, I agree.
we may be able to the first week in October. So trying to simplify it, I think that right now we have one big pending decision, and that would be whether or not we go with the alternative of the second edition. And I'd have you go back to the PowerPoint slides as to why that was the recommended alternative and the benefits to the community, as well as continuity of operations, and the fact that we have multiple space issues and the first alternative doesn't truly fix any of them. It would just kind of push the bucket down the street. You know, we're not really solving any problem.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, it is going to require some use of the cumulative reserve or financing. We could still finance through a bond. We could potentially borrow from some of our enterprise funds. We could look at options for financing. I think in order to make that deadline, we would need to approve a design contract probably in early September in order to make the October, because again, we need to have construction drawings drawn and we need to go back to the hearing examiner for some planning work. And so I can bring this back with that question alone being alternative 1 or alternative 2 in order to get a consensus from council. And then there's a separate ordinance that would need, or resolution that would need to be approved in order for us to use the cumulative reserve. And in the cumulative reserve ordinance, it does spell out what are the emergency issues and why are we suggesting that we use a portion of it. And that could be brought forward along with alternative financing plans. And then we could choose at that time if we want to use the cumulative reserve, if you want to finance it through a bond, which could be councilmanic because we do have the money in the reserve. And so that wouldn't require voter approval. We could finance it and then pay it from the cumulative reserve slowly over time. That's another alternative. Or potentially we'll look at options to lend from our enterprise accounts, which may be an option. Okay, we'll look into that. And then, so I think that that's the way to kind of continue to move the conversation forward without really committing right now to one specific option, but still not, if I'm concerned that if we spend much more time, we may lose our window and have to pay additional dollars, up to $200,000, which to your point is,
Yeah.
you know, I mean,
It
with
may or
the
may
scope
not
of the
be
$5
real.
million is that, yeah, it may or may not be real. And at the scope of $5 million, that's not a huge sum of money. So those are my 2 cents, and I can bring it back next week for that vote to decide alternative 1 design or alternative 2, spend additional dollars in order to drop the construction documents in order to meet the October deadline. If it's rejected by council, we'll move forward with alternate 1, which is the 1 addition, and see where the bids line up and make that decision of whether or not we want to spend the money on that design. If it passes, then we'll meet our October 15th deadline, and you can decide at that time how you want to finance it.
We have an estimate of the design cost is about 150.
No, it's about, I think it was around 90,000.
So I would entertain a bobblehead on that. We don't make any decisions here.
Yeah.
So next week's council meeting, we'll be deciding on either 1 or 2
Or neither.
or neither.
Yeah, there should be a third option.
Yeah.
Well, that 1, 2 or no.
Yeah, because I to be totally transparent, I'm on the fence. I'm kind of with you, Kenny. As far as like, just is it the right time to even do any of this when we're talking about a budget deficit? I understand it comes out of 2 different pots of money. I'm not opposed to moving forward. I'm just on the fence right now. So having that third option, then neither would be good for folks like myself.
No, I appreciate that, but
It is different dollars. And again, we are at a bit of a breaking point right now with our staff capacity.
yes.
We're adding 2 additional bodies to City Hall as it is. So we're
Mhm.
office space. This project, if it was to move forward, we're probably, I'd say at least 6 months to a year away from being able to occupy the remodeled city hall.
18 months minimum.
Okay, 18 months away from occupying the remodeled city hall, depending on when everything goes to bid and then construction actions. So I'm concerned with needing to add additional staff at some point and truly having no place to put them.
There's no place to put them now. I mean, you can't,
And that's where-
We've gotten really creative.
if you've read the memos that we've gotten, the mayor and the city administrator cannot even meet with members of the public without going through staff spaces. And I don't know about you, I've had offices well, I currently have an office in here a couple weeks, and I don't need people coming in my space. You know, and the public deserves to get served for a level of service efficiently. And, you know, we all know what's coming. The build out of this town is just say 8,500, just roughly, that's what we have to submit. That comes with additional services by the city. You have to be able to support it. And I don't know about you, but if I was the elected mayor of a municipality, I would like to have my office be my office and not subject to people traipsing through it. But at the same time, the public has the public has the right to be heard, has the right to meet. You do it in an efficient way.
May I add? May I comment?
Yes, please.
I didn't want to drag this any further. I appreciate Administrator Brunel's suggestion. I think she's right on it and I'm not. And we can move forward in that way. I would appreciate it. I just want it to be a consensus of something so we can take the next step. And so I appreciate, and I would like to see your plan, Ms. Brunel, of the way we're going to, you suggested vote first on the agreement to do the addition or not, and then we'll know where we're at and what we're doing.
Thank you, Councilmember Rose. Anybody else? Hearing seen none. I'm going to call it 7:37 PM on the 15th of August, concluding the Buckley Special